Hello folks, welcome back to Three Barrow Farm. As you can see, I'm wearing a jumper. It is getting cold. My name is Amy and we live in central Victoria, Australia. And I promised that I would come back with some more videos of recent, but life has just been so busy with all the preserving in between work and being taxi driver to my 3 children has been quite full. But luckily I've been filming bits and pieces as I've been preserving all the food that we've been harvesting. We still have a few apples on this apple tree behind me and a few apple trees in the backyard that are still full of apples as well. I've got so many apples and pears all over the kitchen table at the moment. I'm going to be storing some of them, but the ones that aren't good for storing I have been preserving in all sorts of ways. So enjoy this video of all the different ways I've been using our apples. I hope you enjoy this video and I hope you get inspired to find some ideas of what to do with your apple harvest. And if you have any more suggestions on what to do with apples, I've got heaps more, so I'm sure there will be another apple video and loads more apple videos to come. Enjoy, see you next time.
We have over 50 apple trees on our property. They are all heritage varieties and most of them we keep small, but when it comes to harvest time, there are plenty of apples to eat, store and preserve. Some of our larger trees have gotten away from us this year. They will need a good prune back this winter. We don't usually let the thin, spindly branches fruit, as they can't hold the fruit very well. We've been harvesting a few apples from each tree to see if they are ready, then harvesting as many as we can process or eat, then we go back out for more. Some of the apples get really big. We have so many different varieties and I hope to do a video next year on all the varieties we love and recommend to grow. If you're growing apples, you need to tell when they are ready. One way to know they have ripened is by looking at the pips. So harvest just one apple from the tree, cut it open, and if the pips inside are pale or white, then the apple isn't ripe. The pips need to be a brown to dark brown or even a black in appearance. These light brown ones are still immature. You can tell as well by their shriveled appearance. These brown pips are perfect and the apples taste beautiful. That's another way of telling whether the apples are ready. Taste them. One problem I've noticed in some of the apples is that they have a transparent flesh. This is called water core. It can happen when the apples have been harvested too late, but the fruit is still edible, although it has a sweeter flavour and can't be stored for very long. It generally happens around the core, but can spread towards the skin of the fruit as well. I've preserved our apples in many different ways this year. The first is by stewing them. Stewing is one easy way to use the entire fruit except the core. I like to use the skins of fruit as most of the nutrients is just under the skin of fruit and vegetables. And when you peel it, you take away a lot of that nutrients. So I've preserved quite a lot of jars of apples by stewing it. I added some cinnamon to these jars to add some different flavour. I stew the fruit and then let it cool before I add it to the Fowler-Vacola jars. Then I bottle them in the water bathing unit. We can open a jar to eat just as is, or make pies or crumbles or any other various recipes that involve cooked apple. We also use the stewed apple in any other baking that involves applesauce. Stewing fruit to bottle is also space saving. In other ways where I bottle apples, they have space around them. So bottling stewed fruit definitely takes up all of the space of the jar and doesn't waste any space at all. So one way of preserving apples that does take up quite a bit of space is by preserving the apples in chunks in water. I peel, core and cut the apples into pieces. While I build up a stock of them, I place them in lemon water to keep them from going too brown. This process does take more time than the stewing, but it's nice to preserve fruit in different ways so you can use them differently in the winter. I place them in the jars and cover them with water. Sometimes I might add a little bit of sugar depending on whether the apple is sweet enough, but I find that just water is sweet enough for us. On this day, I decided to use some sugar. I added about 3/4 of a cup of sugar, poured boiling water over it to dissolve the sugar, and then I added cold water on top so that I was filling the jars with cool water and not hot. I wipe the rims of the jars before putting the rings, lids and clips on every time. I don't want any liquid, sugar or apple to hinder the vacuum seal. I used my knife to help assist some of the bubbles that were getting stuck in between the glass jar and the apple pieces. You can use a chopstick or one of the Fowler's packing sticks. I have one of the sticks, but it was easier to use the knife as it was thinner than the packing stick. We inherited most of our Fowler's jars, lids and clips from my husband's grandfather. It's lovely using something secondhand and seeing the markings he left on the lids. He did a lot of fruit preserving in his day, mostly with stone fruit. I highly recommend these jars if you live in Australia. They are so easy to use and last so very long. The only thing you need to replace each time is the natural rubber ring. The jars, lids and clips can be used over and over again, and you can easily buy them secondhand. I've recently purchased a whole heap of jars from someone local and extended my ability to be able to preserve more. I have experimented with reusing some of the rubber rings, especially when I know we're going to be opening the jars in only a few weeks after preserving it. Sometimes they work, but as you can see here, one of the jars has siphoned, meaning the liquid has come out of the jar because a proper seal has not been made. We put this one straight in the fridge to eat as soon as possible. It won't last on the shelf. I also reuse the seals when I'm putting dried herbs in the jars. The rings can help seal the contents inside, but because it's dry, they don't need to be completely sealed like wet produce does. I didn't want to waste any of the cores and peels on this day, so I experimented with making apple scrap jelly with this amount. The recipe I used is in the description of this video, but basically I needed to cook down the peels and cores in water. I must have been distracted on the day and added the sugar, but normally you don't add the sugar until after you've cooked the fruit in the water. So I adjusted the correct amount after I measured out the amount of liquid that I ended up with. You need a certain amount of sugar to each cup of liquid. Even though I made a mistake, the jelly turned out well, and now we have a treat for our toast in the winter. For the first time, I used these tiny Fowler jars that we inherited. Because the water bathing unit is too big and I didn't want the jars to fall over, I used empty jars around them so that the space was filled. It worked so well, and the big jars were sterilised at the same time. My kids have been dehydrating as much apple as they can, although they also eat as much as they can, and therefore there is no more left in storage. But they had fun, and it's one way they can easily help with the preserving. We'd like to invest in a better peeler corer tool, or add a clamp to this apple corer. The suction on the bottom has never worked well, no matter what surface we've been on. So now we just use force to hold it in place. A clamp would make it much easier though in the meantime, until we find another machine out there. If you know of any, please let me know. The last way I used up the peel and cores was to have a go at making apple scrap vinegar. I'm not sure if it has worked as well as I imagined, and it is still in its fermenting stage, but hopefully we will get something out of this jar of apple scraps. If you have made apple scrap vinegar before, I would love to hear from you and know any tips that you have. Thank you so much for watching, friends. I hope your garden is flourishing. See you next time. Bye.